Chapter 4: The Fall of the Inquisitor. The next morning was gray, like cooled ash in a fireplace. The London sky seemed to have decided to support Elias's mourning, draping the city in a dense, low shroud of clouds through which not a single ray could penetrate. Elias sat in his study, staring at the blank wall where his grandfather's portrait had once hung, sold 3 months ago. Before him, on a massive oak desk piled with old, now useless grimoires bound in dragon skin, lay an object that did not belong here. A gear, rough, rusty, smelling of rancid whale oil, graphite dust, and cheap metal. It seemed an alien, malignant growth on the polished mahogany, an insult to everything the study symbolized. Elias hadn't slept all night. He drank and read books on mechanics borrowed from the city library. Methodically, glass by glass, destroying the stock of elite Veuve Clicquot cognac from 1812. But even the best alcohol could not drown out the ringing, sterile cotton wool silence that had settled in his head. Before, alcohol worked as a soft filter. It dulled the noise, made the voices of the dead quieter, turning their screams into distant whispers. Now he drank with the opposite goal, to try to feel at least something, to induce at least a phantom pain of the lost gift, at least a spark in the channels. Useless. Inside it was quiet and empty, like a looted crypt. Master Elias. Barnaby seeped through the closed door, carrying a silver tray with breakfast, toast, a soft-boiled egg, and coffee. The ghost moved cautiously, as if fearing that an extra sound might shatter the crystal silence of the room. "You didn't touch your dinner, sir. You need to eat." "Take it away," Elias replied hoarsely, not taking his eyes off the gear. "A letter has been delivered for you, sir. Urgent, from the office of the High Inquisitor." The courier was persistent. Elias slowly turned his head, his stiff neck cracking. "Burn it, Barnaby." "I'm afraid that is impossible, sir. The envelope is enchanted with a 4th-level spell, self-immolation only after reading by the addressee. And the courier, he is waiting in the hall. It is not an ordinary messenger boy. It is a bailiff, with shackles on his belt." Elias smirked. The smirk came out crooked, like crack on porcelain. A bailiff. So they decided not to delay. They want to stage a public execution. He stood up with difficulty. His legs held him poorly. The floor swayed like a deck. But he forced himself to straighten up. Aristocratic bearing was the only thing he had left. He walked to the full-length mirror. His appearance was, to put it mildly, unpresentable. Eyes red with burst capillaries, a great 3-day stubble on his cheeks, skin the color of old, moldy parchment. He tried to smooth his hair, which stuck out in a cowlick, but his hand trembled treacherously. "My staff, Barnaby." "Your staff is destroyed, sir. I gathered the splinters into a black onyx urn as you requested. It is on the mantelpiece." "Ah, yes, destroyed. Like my career, like my life." Elias forcibly opened the bottom drawer of the desk. There, among old letters and promissory notes, lay a spare artifact, a cane of black ebony with a silver pommel in the shape of a raven's head. Inside, there was no dragon vein or mana capacitor. Inside hid only a thin, sharp stiletto of Toledo steel and a primitive spring mechanism with a kinetic energy store, a self-defense toy he had used in his youth when walking through dangerous districts, before he knew how to kill with a glance. Now it was the only weapon he had left, a weapon for a man stripped of magic. "Tell the bailiff I'll be down shortly. And, Barnaby, hide that gear in the safe." The ghost hovered over the desk, looking at the dirty part with disgust. "In the safe with Lady Margaret's family jewels, sir? A rusty piece of iron next to the tiara?" "Precisely. Right now, that piece of iron is worth more than all my great-grandmother's diamonds, because it holds the truth. And diamonds are just stones." Elias left the study, dressed in the strict, boring suit of an ordinary aristocrat. Gray tweed, no velvet, not the time for masquerades and inquisitor robes. He felt he wouldn't be wearing that title for much longer, exactly as long as the road to the directorate took. The building of the Royal Inquisitorial Service, a gloomy Gothic hulk opposite the tower, always oppressed with its architecture. Gargoyles, chimeras, narrow arrow-slit windows. Inside, it smelled of sealing wax, centuries-old book dust, and fear. Elias knew this fear of fear well. Before, Criminals being led to interrogation feared him. Today, this fear emanated from the clerks. He walked down long corridors, and every step was difficult, as if he was walking against a strong wind. He felt naked without his familiar cocoon of protective spells. Before, he walked here like a king. Junior Inquisitors parted, pressing against the walls, feeling the power of his aura. Secretaries bowed their heads, afraid to meet his gaze. Today, no one looked him in the eye. They looked at the floor. They examined their shoes. They whispered behind his back, and this whispering, even without magic, was distinctly audible. Heard about Granville? They say he burned out completely. Empty shell. Cripple. Rumors in the Directorate spread faster than the plague. Elias gripped the pommel of his cane so hard, the silver raven dug its beak into his palm. Empty shell. The most terrible insult for a mage, worse than murderer. It meant nonentity. He pushed open the door to Sterling's reception room. The secretary, Mr. Peabody, a dry old man with ink stains on his fingers, didn't even raise his head. "The Inquisitor is waiting for you, Mr. Thorne. Go in." The tone was the kind used with petitioners who came for alms. Sterling's office was the embodiment of bureaucratic hell. Walls lined with expensive panels were hidden by endless racks of files. Cases. Thousands of cases. Opened, closed, forgotten, buried. Sterling himself, a corpulent man with shortness of breath, a red face, and the watery eyes of a fish, sat behind a desk that resembled a fortress wall of papers. He didn't stand up. He didn't even stop writing when Elias entered. The scratch of his quill in the silence seemed deafening. "Sit down, Thorne." Elias remained standing, leaning on his cane. "I'll stand. I have little time. I need to get back to the investigation. I have a lead." "To the investigation? To which exactly, may I ask? To the one where you destroyed a Category 1 crime scene? Or to the one where you allowed Lord Granville's body to burn, making a re-examination impossible and depriving us of the victim's testimony?" "It was a trap," Elias said firmly, trying to make his voice sound confident, though everything inside him clenched. There was an ethereal absorber installed there. Someone used technology to drain magic and create a vacuum. "Technology?" Sterling sighed as if speaking to a mentally ill child. "Elias, we're not in a dime novel about mad scientists. Steam engines don't eat magic. They turn wheels and pump water. But necromancers who overestimated their powers, inflated their egos to the sky, and entered into resonance with an unstable field, that happens, often, especially with those who abuse stimulants." The Inquisitor looked expressively at Elias's trembling hands, then at his red eyes. "You're drunk, Thorne." "I am sober," Elias lied. "Are you accusing me of incompetence? Me? The man who solved the Fleet Street Ripper case?" "I read facts, Thorne. Leave emotions for your memoirs. The facts are, Granville is dead. The killer is not found. The name is not named. You caused a magical explosion in an elite residential district. The newspapers are furious. The mayor demands blood to calm the voters. And Cross," Sterling grimaced as if he had swallowed a lemon, "Cross has already filed an official complaint about the barbaric and dangerous methods of the Directorate. He proposes replacing us with his experts and machines. And after your performance yesterday, I have no single argument against it. You gave him the key to the city." "Cross is a murderer." Elias struck the floor with his cane in rage. A weak kinetic discharge accumulated by the spring shot from the tip, but only slightly rocked a stack of papers on the desk. Sterling didn't even blink. He looked at the cane with pity. "Toys, Elias. Have we come to this?" "I found evidence." Elias ignored the barb. "Apart from his machines, a gear with specific lubricant." "A gear?" Sterling asked with an eyebrow. "And where is it? Did you enter it in the case file? Did you fill out a seizure protocol with witnesses? Or did you just shove some trash into your pocket like a petty thief?" I gave it to safekeeping." "You have nothing, Elias. No evidence, no witnesses. And judging by your aura, which is now dimmer than my paperweight, you no longer have the gift. You are empty, Thorne. You are a battery that has run out." The words fell into the silence of the office like heavy cobblestones. Elias felt the cold in his chest compress into an icy lump. Sterling saw. They all saw. Hiding the emptiness from another mage, even as weak as Sterling, was impossible. It was like trying to hide the absence of an arm. The Inquisitor opened a desk drawer and took out a form with gold embossing. Order number 4122, on the temporary suspension of First Category Inquisitor Elias Thorne from service due to loss of professional fitness and health reasons. He slowly, with a finger, pushed the paper across the desk to Elias. Hand over your badge, Elias, and your license to practice higher necromancy. Elias looked at the paper. The letters swam before his eyes. This was the end. Not just of a job, it was a death sentence for his identity. Without a license, he didn't even have the right to draw a protective circle against cockroaches or light a candle with magic. He became a civilian, a commoner, someone he had despised and protected all his life. "This is a mistake," he whispered, and his voice trembled. "Sterling, listen to me. Something terrible is happening in the city. This silence, it's not just a glitch, it's a weapon. If you fire me, there will be no one to stop it. Cross, if I don't fire you, you will be put in prison for criminal negligence and mass destruction," Sterling interrupted harshly. "I am giving you a chance to leave quietly, like a gentleman. Take a leave of absence. Get treatment. They say there are sanitariums in Switzerland for burned-out mages. Mountain air, peace. Maybe in a year the channels will recover." "We don't have a year. We don't even have a week." "Badge, Thorne." Elias slowly, with disobedient fingers, unbuttoned his frock coat, unpinned the silver badge with the skull and scales. It was warm from his body, a part of himself. He placed it on the desk. Metal clinked against wood, the sound of defeat, the sound of a coffin lid closing. And the license. Elias took out a folded sheet of parchment with the royal seal from his inner pocket, which he had carried near his heart for 10 years, placed it alongside. Sterling nodded with satisfaction and swept the items into the drawer. "You are dismissed. Security will escort you to the exit so you don't get lost." Elias turned on his heels. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't offer his hand. He walked out of the office, feeling the heavy, sticky gaze of the Inquisitor on his back. In the corridor, 2 burly bailiffs, golems in uniforms, immediately fell in step with him. They didn't touch him, but walked close, breathing down his neck, as if escorting a dangerous criminal. "I know where the exit is," Elias hissed through his teeth. They were silent. Golems don't know how to speak. He descended into the hall, walked out onto the street. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained leaden, oppressive. The city hummed. Carriages, people, the shouts of newspaper sellers. "Explosion in Kensington. Mystery of Lord's death." Life went on as usual. No one noticed that one of the keepers of the barrier between worlds had just been thrown onto the scrap heap of history. Elias didn't go home. When he left the directorate building, clutching the useless cane in his hand, his legs carried him away from the mansions of Kensington and the government buildings of Whitehall. He went where London pretended to be civilized, to the Shadow Quarter. It was a place that didn't exist on the maps of the Postal Service, a labyrinth of narrow, crooked streets behind the old fish market, where the air smelled of rotten seaweed, opium, and burnt sulfur. Here lived those rejected by the Council of Mages, dropouts, self-taught chimerologists, dealers in stolen amulets, and ether junkies, people hooked on pure mana, squeezing it out of themselves to the last drop. Before, as an Inquisitor, Elias appeared here only with a squad of battle mages to burn out dens. Now he walked alone, slouching, collar turned up to hide his face. But there was nothing to hide. Without his aura, without the pressure of power radiating from his figure, he was invisible. Just another tall, skinny man in an expensive but dirty suit looking for a fix. He didn't need a fix. He needed hope. He turned into an alley the locals called the Gut. Slush of undeterminate color squelched underfoot. Shadows sat in niches in the walls. "Fresh unicorn horn powder," someone whispered from the darkness in a hoarse voice. "Cheap, my lord, will raise even the dead." "Predictions by rat liver," mumbled an old woman fingering rosary beads of vertebrae. Elias walked past without raising his eyes. He needed Vargo. Vargo the alchemist was a genius expelled from the guild for experiments with vampire blood. They said he could brew a potion capable of returning talent even to a squib, a person born into a mage family but devoid of the gift. Elias had always considered this quackery. Today, he prayed it was true. The door to Vargo's basement was reinforced with iron and painted with protective glyphs that had long faded. Elias knocked with a special rhythm, an old informant code. A small window in the door opened. A yellow, unblinking eye with a vertical pupil, consequence of a failed transmutation, stared at him. "We're closed." "It's me, Vargo, Thorne." The eye blinked. The scraping of bolts was heard behind the door. The door opened just enough to squeeze through. Inside, it smelled of formalin, dried herbs, and something sickly sweet. The whole room was filled with shelves of jars in which floated things better not left to examine. Vargo himself, belled, with parchment-colored skin and long, thin fingers, stood behind the counter, wiping a glass retort with a rag. "The great Inquisitor," he hissed. There was no respect in his voice, only venom. "Descended from the heavens into our cesspool. Came to arrest me for an expired toad license?" "I am no longer an Inquisitor," Elias said dully. He placed his gold brigade watch with its chain on the wooden surface. Vargo took the watch, weighed it in his palm, opened the lid. "Good mechanism, Swiss, but here they value ether, not gold. What's with you, Thorne? Your aura, it's silent, as if it was cut out." "I need a wakener," Elias let the question pass. "The strongest you have, Phoenix tier or Black Lotus." "Oh ho," Vargo whistled. "You want hard stimulation. Channels clogged? Burned out at work?" "I need to return my hearing," Elias enunciated. "How much?" Vargo looked at him carefully with his yellow eye. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a small vial sealed with wax containing a ruby liquid. "This is dragon's blood, mixed with mandrake extract and crushed moonstone. Forbidden in 7 kingdoms. If you just have a block, this will break the dam. If you are empty, it might burn your veins. Give it." The watch isn't enough. Elias took the signet ring with the family crest off his finger. It hurt, as if he were giving away a piece of his name. Vargo scooped up the payment. "Drink here. If you croak, at least I'll sell the corpse to necromancers. A fresh Inquisitor is worth a lot." Elias tore off the wax. His hands trembled. He brought the vial to his lips and drank it in one gulp. The liquid was thick, hot, and tasted like pepper, iron, and ash. Fire rolled down his throat, fell into his stomach, and from there rushed through his veins. Elias grabbed the edge of the counter, breathing heavily. He waited. He waited for the blow, the explosion of power, the return of the noise. He wanted to hear anything, a ghost's moan, death's whisper, the hum of ley lines. His heart beat like mad, temples pounded, blood rushed to his face, fingers began to prickle with needles. "Well?" asked Vargo greedily, watching him. Elias closed his eyes. He reached out with his entire being. "I am here. I listen. Answer." Nothing. Absolute, ringing, mocking silence. Only the pounding of his own heart and the rush of blood in his ears. The potion worked on a physical level, accelerated metabolism, boiled the blood, but it had nothing to accelerate on the etheric level. The channels weren't just clogged, they were absent. It was like pouring aviation fuel into a smashed engine. The fuel burns, but the pistons don't move. Elias screamed. It was a scream of pain and rage. He grabbed the empty vial and hurled it at the wall. "Nothing!" he rasped, sliding to the floor. He was shaking from chemical shock. "There is nothing!" "You burned out," stated Vargo, without a shadow of pity. "You are empty, Thorne, like a broken vase. A potion cannot fill what has no bottom. Leave." "Give me more. Maybe the dose was small." "Another dose will stop your heart. Get out of here. You're scaring away my luck." Vargo pointed to the door. Elias, staggering, stood up. He felt dirty, raped by his own hope. He went out into the street. The rain had intensified. Now it was a real downpour, turning the alleys into rivers of mud. Elias wandered without seeing the road. The effect of the potion began to wear off, replaced by monstrous weakness and nausea. His legs buckled. He walked into some dead end to catch his breath, leaned against the wet brick wall trying to calm the trembling. "Hey, uncle!" The voice was young, impudent, and cheerful. Elias opened his eyes. The exit from the dead end was blocked by 3, ordinary street punks of the Shadow Quarter. Dirty jackets, caps, shivs in hands. They saw he was drunk, or on something, saw the good fabric of his coat, and most importantly saw that he had no protection. A mage's aura usually scared off such jackals a mile away, but now Elias didn't glow. "Lost, uncle?" asked the leader, playing with a knife. "Maybe we can help you lighten your pockets? They seem to be dragging you to the ground." Elias straightened up. The habit of command hadn't died completely. "Get lost," he hissed. "You don't know who you are speaking to. I am Thorne." "Thorne?" the punks guffawed. "That sorcerer? We heard. They say you were kicked out. They say you are nobody now." The leader stepped forward. "Show us a trick, sorcerer. Light a little fire." "Well?" Elias reflexively threw up his hand, folding his fingers into the sign of Ignis. It was a movement practiced thousands of times. Usually, after this, the enemy turned into a living torch. He snapped his fingers. Nothing. Not even a spark. Only the wet hand in the air. The leader laughed and swung hard, punching Elias in the face. The blow was heavy, bony, and humiliatingly real. Elias flew back, hitting the back of his head against the wall. The taste of blood appeared in his mouth. "No magic," smirked the thug, "just meat." They moved on him in a pack. They intended not just to rob, they intended to beat him to death, for being rich, for being a mage, for all their miserable lives in the dirt. Elias slid down the wall. He saw the raised knife, saw rotten teeth. At that moment, something clicked in his head. Not magic, anger, the animal, primal rage of a rat cornered. His hand found his cane on the ground, the ordinary wooden cane with a bone pommel he had taken with him. Physics, the word flashed in his mind. Maybe Clara mentioned it, or the literature reading from the library under the influence of alcohol hadn't been in vain. Mass times acceleration. When the leader leaned down to grab him by the lapels, Elias didn't draw signs. He simply, with all his might, putting all his fear and hatred into the blow, struck with the cane. Not magic, wood and bone. The pommel smashed into the thug's kneecap with a dull crunch. He howled, folding in half. Elias, using the momentum, jumped up. The adrenaline of dragon's blood still surged in his blood, giving him unnatural speed. A second blow, backhand, across the face of the second attacker. The cane slit the cheek, blood sprayed. "I said, out!" roared Elias. He didn't use the voice of power. He screamed, and there was so much madness in this scream that the third thug backed away. "Psycho, let's bolt!" They picked up the limping leader and ran, dissolving into the rain. Elias was left alone in the dead end, breathing heavily, gripping the cane until his knuckles turned white. Blood dripped from his nose, mixing with the dirty rainwater. He looked at the cane. On the bone pommel remained the thug's blood and a tuft of hair. He won, without spells, without spirits, just with a piece of wood, physics, and anger. It was dirty, it was unaesthetic, it was vulgar, but it was effective. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his expensive, now hopelessly ruined coat. The pain from the beating began to break through the adrenaline veil. His ribs ached, his lip was split. He wanted to go home, to the fireplace, to Barnaby, to a bottle, to forget himself in sleep. He shoved his hand into his trousers pocket to check if his keys were stolen. His fingers touched something cold, sharp, and hard. The gear, the very gear Clara Vance had given him in the library. Matter does not lie. Elias took it out. In the dim light of a gas lamp flickering at the end of the alley, the gear seemed like a black eye looking at him reproachfully. Vargo said he was empty, that magic was gone. Sterling said he was unfit. The street showed him he was just a piece of meat. But this gear, it was part of something bigger, part of the mechanism that killed Granville and stole his gift. And the only person in this damned city who could explain how this mechanism worked was that red-haired girl from the morgue. "To hell with home," Elias whispered, spitting blood onto the cobblestones. "At home there are only ghosts and debts. I need answers." He pushed off the wall. His head was spinning, but the goal held him on his feet better than any levitation spell.
Elias adjusted his collar, gripped the cane more comfortably, now not as a gentleman's accessory but as a club, and marched out of the shadow quarter. He didn't walk like an aristocrat. He walked like a man who had nothing to lose. He went to seek science because magic had betrayed him.
Elias stood on the steps of the directorate again, leaning on his cane, feeling like a grain of sand in the immense mechanism of the city. He had nowhere to go. At home waited Barnaby with a reproachful gaze and empty bottles. At the club, they would laugh at him and wouldn't let him over the threshold. Clara Vance, that impudent girl in glasses. She spoke of science, that matter doesn't lie. She was there. She saw what happened. And she was the only one who didn't look at him like a broken doll or a madman. In her eyes was interest, scientific interest. But where to look for her? At the university? They wouldn't let him in without a pass and a license. Academics ruled there, hating practitioners. He frowned, recalling details of last night. She spoke about Granville's toxicology, about tissue analysis. The morgue. The Royal Central Morgue was located in the basements of this very building, but the entrance was from the back courtyard, through a gloomy arch popularly called the Gates of Sorrow. Pathologists and lower mage embalmers worked there, whose task was to prepare bodies for burial, and autopsy archives were kept there. If Vance was really working on the case officially, or semi-officially under Blackwood's wing, she must be there, or leave a trace in the log. Elias looked back at the bailiffs. They stood like idols at the main entrance, arms crossed on their chests. He pulled his top hat over his eyes, activating a simple, almost childish artifact, a version of eyes, sewn into the lining, a weak glamour that wouldn't surprise real mages, but was quite possible to fool stupid guards with. And, trying not to limp so as not to attract attention, he headed around the corner, into the narrow, stinking alley leading to the backyard. It was humiliating, sneaking into his own directorate where he was a star through the back door like a thief, like a rat. But he had left his pride on Sterling's desk along with the badge. Now he had only anger left, cold, calculating rage, and the desire to prove he hadn't gone mad. He approached the heavy iron door of the morgue, covered in rust spots. On it hung an enameled sign with a skull. No entry for unauthorized personnel. Danger, biological and necrotic threat. Elias looked around. The alley was empty. Only a scrawny cat hissed at a trash can. He pulled the handle. Locked. Naturally. Out of habit, reflexively, he placed his palm on the lock, trying to feel the mechanism with magic, to send an unlocking impulse. Emptiness. Silence. The lock was just a piece of cold iron. It didn't respond. Elias swore through his teeth, punching the door. The pain in his knuckles sobered him. "You are no longer a mage, idiot. Get used to it." Then he remembered the cane. He pressed a hidden button under the silver raven pommel. With a quiet click, a thin, strong steel pick blade popped out of the bird's beak. Mechanical. His father had taught him this in childhood, laughing and calling it fairy tale tricks, or skills in case magic runs out. Then it seemed like a joke. A real mage doesn't need keys, Elias. "Forgive me, father," whispered Elias, inserting the pick into the keyhole with a bitter grin. "But today, the fair has come to us, and magic has run out." He began to pick the lock. His hands trembled from tension and lack of practice, but muscle memory, beaten in by the lessons of the old burglar his father hired for general development, worked. Turn, pressure, click of a pin, another one. The lock gave way with a heavy, rusty scrape that seemed like music to Elias. The door opened slightly, exhaling a cloud of cold air into his face, smelling of formalin, bleach, and the sweet scent of decay. Elias looked around. No one. He slipped inside, into the cool darkness of the corridor. It was quiet here, but this was the right silence. The silence of dead bodies lying peacefully on tables. Silence that can be broken by footsteps, not the silence of emptiness in the head. He walked forward, navigating by memory of the building plans. Unidentified body section, toxicology lab, the duty pathologist's office. If Clara was right, if science could really give answers where magic falls silent and betrays, he would find that answer. And if not, well, in the morgue, there is always a free zinc table for one more corpse. Elias Thorne,
former Inquisitor, and now burglar, outcast, and empty shell, adjusted his coat collar and stepped into the darkness of the dungeon to meet his new destiny.
Chapter 5. A Deal with the Scavenger. The Royal Morgue was a place where magic and bureaucracy intertwined in a cold, sterile embrace, spawning an atmosphere of absolute hopelessness. Elias quietly closed a heavy, lead-lined door behind him, cutting off the draft from the corridor. Inside, it was cool. Walls clad in white tiles covered with a network of fine cracks reflected the light of magical spheres hanging from the ceiling in iron cages. Along the walls stretched endless rows of stainless steel drawers, a dormitory for those awaiting their turn for autopsy, identification, or burial in a common grave. Usually, for Elias, this place was the loudest in London. The morgue always hummed with voices. Souls torn violently from bodies clung to their mutilated shells, complaining, weeping, demanding justice, or simply howling in fear of the flow. He had to set his mental shields to maximum, compressing his temples until they hurt just to walk through here without being deafened by the chorus of the dead. Today, a blessed but frightening silence reigned here. Dead silence. Only the low, guttural hum of the ventilation system and the rhythmic, maddening drip of water from a tap in the far corner were audible. In the center of the hall, in the pathology section, burned a bright electric lamp, sharp, yellow, chemical light, contrasting with the soft bluish glow of the standard magical fixtures. Under the lamp, bent over a zinc dissection table, stood Clara Vance. She had changed her ridiculous outfit from the library to a long, rubberized butcher's apron, on which fresh, dark spots glistened wetly. On her eyes were protective goggles with thick lenses, and in her hands, a saw, an ordinary mechanical surgical saw for opening the sternum. The sound of metal biting into bone was dry and screeching. It made Elias grimace as if a nail were dragged across glass. Zzzt, zzzt, zzzt. He took a step forward, and his cane tapped against the tile. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Clara froze. She didn't turn sharply, didn't scream. She simply stopped sawing, neatly placed the instrument on a metal tray, clink, and slowly pulled off rubber gloves stained with something brown and viscous. "You walk quietly for a man with a cane, Mr. Thorne," her voice echoed off the tiles, sounding tired and calm. "But you picked the lock loudly. You should lubricate the spring in your pick, with graphite grease." She turned. The goggles were pushed up onto her forehead, revealing eyes around which lay deep shadows of fatigue. "So Sterling is a clinical idiot," she stated without emotion, as if making a diagnosis. "Firing the only witness to the anomaly and the bearer of unique contact experience is the height of bureaucratic stupidity. However, what to expect from officials?" "What is that?" Elias nodded at the table, trying to hide his nausea. The smell of decay broke through even the formalin. "A chimera from the city sewers under Fleet Street, a mixture of gray rat and, judging by DNA analysis, an alligator someone flushed down the toilet 10 years ago. Mutation under the influence of alchemical discharges from a dye factory. I'm looking for a gland that produces neurotoxin, but this is just a hobby to calm the nerves. Manual labor soothes." She walked to the neighboring table, covered with a white sheet, and with a sharp movement pulled off the fabric. Things lay there. Elias's melted gold cufflinks, fragments of his dragon staff, looking like charred brands, and glass test tubes with samples of ash and tissues from Granville's library. "I was waiting for you," Clara said, picking up a test tube with black dust and twirling it in the light. "You were both too stubborn to fail doing something so intricate as a suicide pact so quickly." "I was waiting for you," Clara said, picking up a test tube with black dust and twirling it in the light. "You were both too stubborn to fail doing something so intricate as a suicide pact so quickly. Or one of your bloodhounds. But I hoped for you, because the others are too arrogant and stupid to listen to a woman, and the scientist at that. I listened to the dead, Miss Vance, all my life. Now I am deaf. I have to listen to the living, and even scientists." Elias took the gear out of his pocket, that same one, rusty, dirty, heavy. He placed it on the metal table between them. The sound of metal hitting metal was heavy and dull. "You said this is evidence. Prove it." Clara picked up the gear with long tweezers. She brought it to the light of the electric lamp, squinting. "Look here.
See these microscopic pores on the metal surface? This isn't a casting defect, it's structure, sintering, powder metallurgy under high pressure. Only one factory in the Empire uses this processing method because they own the patent for the presses. Factory number 4 of Archibald Cross. I've heard this already, Elias interrupted impatiently. But why did my magic disappear? Why did it strike me? How can a piece of iron kill the gift? Because this thing, Clara tapped the gear tooth with tweezers, is not made of steel. It's an alloy with the addition of black ether. Or, as my theoretical colleagues call it in closed articles, null metal. Null metal, Elias frowned. That's a myth, a fairy tale for the Academy's first year. Alchemists searched for a material that blocks magic for centuries but never found it. Gold conducts, iron scatters, lead shields, but nothing blocks completely. Cross doesn't block magic, Thorne. You are thinking in categories of protection. It eats it. She walked to the powerful microscope standing on a wide windowsill and gestured for Elias to join her. Take a look, I made a cross-section. Elias reluctantly leaned toward the eyepiece. In the circle of light, he saw the metal structure. It resembled a black sponge or honeycomb, thousands of tiny, greedy vortexes. It's a metamaterial, Clara explained in a lecturer's voice. It works like an absorbent, like a sponge for water. Only instead of water, it absorbs ether. Any ether. Life force, mana, spells. When you tried to conduct a ritual in the room where the killer or his device made of this material was, you opened the channel. You gave him access to your source, and this material, being somewhere nearby, simply sucked you dry. It created a draft, an etheric vacuum.
Elias straightened up. He felt nauseous, his legs weakened, and he leaned heavily on the edge of the table. So the killer wears armor made of this metal. Or he is made of it himself, Clara said quietly, looking him straight in the eye. They looked at each other. The meaning of the words hung in the cold air of the morgue like a heavy weight. An automaton, Elias exhaled. A mechanical killer feeding on the magic of victims, invulnerable to spells because he absorbs them. Precisely. Was Granville a strong, sensitive mage? Weak, mediocre, but he had a huge collection of artifacts, capacitors, wands, crystals. So he was a battery. He wasn't killed for money or secrets. He was squeezed out like a lemon, along with all his junk. Elias gripped the pommel of his cane. The picture was coming together. A terrible, logical, mathematically verified picture. Cross is building his tower. He promises the city infinite energy. But where does he get it if he doesn't burn coal and doesn't use hydro turbines? He collects it. Clara finished the thought for him, and he needs raw material, concentrated magical raw material. It became even colder in the morgue, although the temperature hadn't changed. Elias looked at his hands, useless, empty hands of a pianist who would never play again. If this is true, then we are in trouble. All of London is a warehouse of raw material. The Academy, the Guild, private collections, every mage is a walking fuel tank for Cross. Not we, Thorne. Clara pulled off the apron, remaining in men's trousers with suspenders and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. But me. You are fired. You are a civilian. You can go to your estate, lock the doors, sell the paintings, and drink wine while the world rolls into the abyss. This is no longer your war. I have no wine. I drank it all yesterday, and I have a score to settle with Cross. Personal. He took from me what made me a thorn. He made me a cripple. And what are you going to do? Walk into his office and hit him on the head with a cane? The guards at the entrance will shoot you. I want to see this place, the factory. I want to find proof, material proof, the kind even Sterling in a court will accept. I want Cross hanging from a gallows and his machines melted down. Clara smirked. There was something predatory in her smile. She took a bunch of keys out of her pocket with a keychain in the shape of a skull, an irony Elias appreciated. Well, since you have no badge but have healthy anger and nothing to lose, welcome to the team, partner. But be warned, I'm the chief scientific officer and the brain of the operation. You are the assistant for public relations, finances, and brute force. I'm an Inquisitor, Elias began out of habit, straightening up. Were one. Accepted. Now you are my lab assistant. Let's go. They exited through the back door into the morgue's backyard. It smelled of wet coal, rotting slops, and rain, which had begun to drizzle again, turning London dirt into slurry. In the middle of the yard, occupying 2 parking spaces for cabs and blocking the exit for the meat wagon, stood it. Elias stopped, looking at the vehicle with undisguised horror of an aristocrat. It was a steammobile, but it looked as if it had been assembled in the dark from the remains of a decommissioned locomotive, a hearse, and a tractor. Huge wheels with spikes and copper spokes, an open brass boiler in the back entangled in a web of pipes from which steam hissed, and a cabin resembling Captain Nemo's bath escape with round portholes. "Meet the Hornet," Clara introduced proudly, patting the machine on the rivets on its side. A dull, powerful ring resounded like striking a bell. "Experimental model. I tweaked the fuel injection system, suspension, and afterburner chamber." "Is it safe?" Elias looked doubtfully at the pressure gauge on the side, the needle of which twitched nervously in the red zone, and the oil stain under the bottom. "Relatively. The brakes sometimes overheat if you stop abruptly, and it spits hot oil from the exhaust a little, but it's the fastest thing in London, not counting lightning." "I prefer a cab." "A cab won't make it in Smog City, Thorne. Horses faint from chemical fumes there in an hour, and local gangs dismantle wooden carriages for firewood while you wait at a traffic light. Get in, or walk in the rain." Elias sighed. He looked back at the gloomy directorate building. Dark windows looked at him indifferently. He was no longer expected there. His life there was over. He opened the heavy, creaking door of the Hornet and, gathering the tails of his coat, climbed inside. The cabin was cramped and smelled of leather, machine grease, copper, and for some reason, mint candies. Instead of the usual soft velvet seats of a cab, here were rigid bucket seats with safety belts resembling harnesses for restraining violent lunatics. Clara jumped into the driver's seat with the agility of a monkey, put goggles on her eyes, and turned a massive ignition key that looked like a valve. The machine shuddered with its whole body. Somewhere in the bowels of the boiler behind him, something hissed, gurgled like an awakened dragon, and then a low, vibrating roar rang out, making his ears pop and his teeth chatter. "Hold on!" Clara shouted over the engine noise, grabbing levers. "To what?" Elias asked in panic, looking for any kind of handle, but his question was drowned in the screech of spinning wheels. The Hornet shot off like a cannonball, leaving black tracks of burnt rubber on the cobblestones. Elias was pressed into the rigid seat back. They flew out of the gateway onto the Thames embankment, scaring a flock of fat crows. Gas lamps outside the windows merged into solid, blurred streaks of light. Wind beat against the glass. The engine roared. They were leaving clean, prim, understandable London, the world of rules, etiquette, and fading magic. Ahead, beyond the bend of the Black River, lay the crimson glow of the industrial zone, Smog City, a place where the sky was the color of a bruise, where laws were written by the power of steam and money, where there were no gentlemen, and where Elias Thorne was just a tourist without a guide and without a weapon. "Where exactly are we going?" he shouted, trying to outshout the turbine howl. "To the pit," Clara replied cheerfully, turning the steering wheel that looked like a submarine helm. "To the workers' bar Iron Gullet. If anyone knows how to get into Cross's clothes factory, it's the regulars there. I hope you know how to drink industrial denatured alcohol, Thorne, and not faint at the sight of mutants." Elias closed his eyes, feeling his stomach jump to his throat on another bump. "God save the Queen," he whispered into the void.